The sun has always felt like a fixed truth, an unwavering presence etched into the sky since before we had words for warmth or time. It is the first thing we drew, the last thing we fear, a god in plain sight. And yet, for most of our existence, we never truly saw it. Not beneath the blaze, not past the veil of brilliance that keeps its secrets sealed in light. I often wonder what it would feel like to stand still before it, not on this earth, shielded by atmosphere and memory, but naked, suspended in a place where heat has no mercy and time seems to boil. Imagine a landscape with no ground, only fire. Not chaotic, but structured, flowing like breath through a molten cathedral. A breath that burns, yet shapes. Not just light, structure, motion, life. We speak of the sun as a thing that gives. It grows wheat and bends shadows. It paints morning into the bones of birds. But it also devours. Inside that blinding silence, hydrogen becomes helium with a violence that predates myth. In every second, it tears apart itself to hold our seasons together. And somewhere inside, deeper than heat or flame, are the rhythms that make our weather, the pulses that sculpt magnetic storms, the echoes that travel through the body of the star like distant, thunderous drums. Now, for the first time in our history, we've looked into that roar. Not with eyes, but with instruments that stretch our senses across the electromagnetic spectrum, unraveling the sun's light strand by strand. Through the lenses of spacecraft like NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory, we've pierced the fire, seen the invisible geometry of plasma curling in loops like serpents made of glass. We've watched storms erupt like solar tsunamis. We've seen rainfall, not of water, but of charged particles spiraling through magnetic veins, crashing back to the surface in glittering cascades. This is not just a closer look. It is a descent, a quiet falling inward, layer by layer, color by temperature, light by wavelength. We are at last beginning to see the sun not as a symbol, but as a place. We begin not at the center, but at the fringe, the outermost whisper of the sun's atmosphere, where the fire meets the void. This is the corona, ghostly, sprawling, and hotter than logic would allow. At over 1,000,000 degrees Kelvin, it defies intuition. You'd think the outer layers would cool with distance from the core. But here, heat surges outward like a reversed flame, its reasons still tangled in magnetic riddles. Scientists speak of wave heating, of reconnection events, but the truth is, we're still guessing. The sun doesn't yield its architecture easily. Seen through extreme ultraviolet light, wavelengths the human eye cannot grasp, the corona blossoms in violent grace. Plasma threads twist and shimmer, rising in arcs that stretch tens of thousands of kilometers above the surface. They sway like seaweed in a solar tide, following invisible field lines written by magnetism itself. These are not static shapes, but living structures, flickering with tension. Each filament, each glowing loop, is a record of stress, a wound in waiting, and then the flare. Solar flares erupt like cracks in the fabric of calm, sudden, and absolute. In an instant, energy stored in tangled magnetic fields is released with the power of billions of hydrogen bombs. Radiation floods outward, crossing the distance to Earth in mere minutes. Satellites blink, auroras ripple. In rare cases, power grids falter under the invisible assault. We are, quite literally, tethered to this star, our systems vulnerable to its breath. Some days the sun opens wider. Coronal mass ejections, immense explosions of solar material, burst forth from the surface like tidal waves made of light and ionized gas. They billow out, slow and majestic, until they become interplanetary storms. From Earth, we see them only through filters, delayed and diminished. But imagine being near. Not consumed, but close enough to feel the flex of that force, the silence before it moves. The geometry of pressure. Blooming. Between these outbursts are coronal holes, dark, gaping regions where magnetic field lines peel open, allowing solar wind to spill freely into space. They are the sun's unsealed wounds, calmer in appearance, but they stream particles like rivers toward Earth, triggering auroras that dance at the poles in silent spectral color. And deeper still, we find the solar prominences, towering arcs of plasma that loop above the photosphere like fiery bridges. Some are taller than planets, some last hours, others weeks. They twist and writhe, suspended against gravity, held in place by nothing but the choreography of magnetism and heat. To watch one unfurl is to glimpse the choreography of an alien ballet, delicate and devastating, slow enough to hypnotize, fast enough to frighten. These observations come from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, which sees not with a single eye, but with many, each tuned to a different slice of the spectrum. Each layer of light reveals a different face of the sun. The quiet, the chaotic, the erupting, the trembling. No single image holds the full truth. The sun, like any powerful thing, reveals itself in fragments, scattered across temperature, light, and time. And still, we are only hovering at the edge. These are the outer layers, the atmospheric expressions of a deeper hidden violence. The sun does not glow from surface tension. It glows from the inside out. And to truly understand its nature, we must move further inward, toward its skin, toward the threshold where light is born and becomes the mask that hides the rest. There is a moment in every descent when wonder begins to shift into unease, when beauty prolonged becomes too vast to hold. It happens here, at the boundary where the solar skin, the photosphere, reveals not clarity, but contradiction. To the unaided eye, the sun appears smooth, a perfect searing circle. But under high resolution, its surface seethes. It is not a surface at all, but a shifting mosaic of granules, cells of convecting plasma, each the size of a continent, rising and falling like breath on a planetary scale. They burst upward, bringing heat from the deeper interior, then cool and sink along their darker edges in a turbulent dance of updrafts and returns. They vanish in minutes, only to be reborn, a boiling ocean with no shore. Look closer still, and the sunspots emerge. Great, dark wounds in the light. They seem still, but they are anything but dead. Sunspots are regions of immense magnetic tension, places where heat is trapped, where plasma churns beneath the visible. Around them, the granules warp, distorted by invisible forces, and flares bloom with unsettling regularity. We once thought these shadows were blemishes, flaws. Now we know they are signals, indicators of power gathering itself. And yet, even in this storm of energy, there is delicacy. From the chromosphere just above, spicules rise, thin, spear-like jets of plasma shooting into the air like solar grass, each lasting only minutes, each dancing upward at speeds that defy intuition. They sway, thousands at once, threading the space between layers with a kind of frantic elegance. How do they form? For years, the question remained unanswered. But in 2017, researchers introduced a new element into their models: neutral particles. Atoms without electric charge, and suddenly the simulations began to breathe. The neutrals allowed the plasma to move in unexpected ways, granting it buoyancy, carving paths through the magnetic fields that once seemed impenetrable. It was a revelation, a reminder that even in the heart of a star, sometimes the smallest, quietest thing can shift the motion of giants. And deeper still, there is rain. In the corona, that uppermost region we first crossed, not all plasma escapes into space. Some of it cools, condenses, and falls back down in shimmering streams. Coronal rain, they call it. Not vapor, not water, but light itself, condensed into motion, slipping down magnetic lines like silver blood finding its way home. Watching it, you might forget the scale, that each drop is the size of a city, each streak a wound healing in reverse. All of this happens in silence. No roar, no crack, no thunder. Only motion and light, violence without sound. But the silence itself begins to feel alive, as if something is watching back through the brightness. Not a consciousness, but a law. An indifference so vast it feels like awareness. This is the turning point, where awe becomes gravity, where the fire we admired from afar reveals its true architecture. Not just to illuminate, but to test, to reshape, to remind us that we orbit not a symbol, but a furnace. One whose heartbeat controls tides of energy so massive, so intricate, that even now, with all our sensors and models and names for things, we are still just beginning to understand where the light comes from and what it costs. To speak of depth in a star is a strange thing. There is no floor, no fixed edge, only layers, temperature, density, pressure, stacking toward something unknowable. And yet, as we move inward, a kind of silence begins to settle. Not the absence of sound, but the stillness of scale. It's like standing at the base of a glacier or at the edge of a desert that has forgotten time. Here, in the transition region, a wafer-thin boundary between the chromosphere and the corona, the laws of heat and space begin to bend. In less than 100 kilometers, the temperature skyrockets from 8,000 to over 500,000 Kelvin. It's a thermal cliff, a place where atoms break and recombine in an instant, where light is born in frequencies we do not see, but whose presence shapes everything we feel. We only know this region through interpretation, through data transformed into color, sound, and motion. In some renderings, it shimmers like silk pulled tight between flames. In others, it ripples with patterns that seem almost cellular, like something alive rearranging itself. Below this, the chromosphere thickens, a band of glowing hydrogen roughly 1,700 kilometers deep. The motion is fevered. Fields knot and twist with ferocity, shaping currents of plasma that surge and retreat in rhythms we don't yet understand. It is in these lower layers that the sun begins to feel less like a furnace and more like a mind. Not thought, but process. Not chaos, but negotiated violence. The deeper we fall, the more we lose the illusion of separation. The star becomes not an object, but a medium. A field through which things pass, transform, disappear. And maybe that's what awe really is. Not fear, not admiration, but the moment your vocabulary breaks open and you realize, there is more happening here than you can name. There is something paradoxical about this journey, that the closer we come to the core, the less we can see. Light, the thing that first made us look up, becomes the very boundary we cannot cross. The photosphere, what we call the sun's surface, is not a solid floor but a threshold. It is the deepest place we can directly observe. Beneath it, light becomes trapped, scattered, buried in the crowd of atoms. We look down and see reflection. Haze. The roar, muted by its own brilliance. But still, what we do see here is astonishing. The granules continue, those convective islands blooming and fading like breath. But now we begin to notice something stranger. Oscillations, waves rippling across the photosphere like rings on water. These aren't just surface effects. They're the visible echo of sound waves traveling through the sun's interior. Pressure waves, bouncing, resonating, whispering to us through the flicker of the surface. It is through these subtle pulses that scientists practice helioseismology, the study of stellar vibrations, a science built not on vision, but on tremor. Imagine a star singing to itself in tones far below human hearing, a voice of gravity and compression echoing in spherical chords. The song is ancient, constant. We only just learned how to listen, and yet it is not all rhythm and order. At the edges of sunspots, the structure breaks. Magnetic fields knot into snarls, holding heat beneath the surface like buried dynamite. These are the seeds of solar flares, the tension points before a burst. When we compare these regions in visible light and extreme ultraviolet, a pattern emerges. What seems dark and dormant in one spectrum flares bright in another. What we miss with one sense is revealed by another. The sun does not lie, but it speaks in layers. This is the moment where perception itself becomes the subject, where the sun becomes not only a body of fire, but a metaphor for our own limitations. We see what our instruments allow. We feel what our models predict. But underneath, beyond the visible, there is always more. Not because it is hidden, but because we are not yet fluent in the language of energy without form. So we ask better questions, we build better lenses, we learn to look without eyes, to hear without ears. We learn that truth isn't a single image, but a convergence, a flickering harmony between what we know and what we feel. And sometimes that flicker is enough to glimpse something real. And now we hover, not above the sun, not inside it, but at a strange altitude of thought. We've traveled through fire without flame, through storms without sound. We've seen loops rise and fall like breath. We've watched rain made of plasma fall back into oceans of light. We've glimpsed the skin of a star and listened to the echoes in its bones. But the journey never truly ends. There is still the core, a place we cannot reach, not even with light. In the sun's center, fusion rages in silence, turning mass into energy, time into temperature. But the light born there takes tens of thousands of years to escape. What touches our skin today, what makes the leaves rise, what casts your shadow, began its escape before humans built cities, before language, before memory. We live by ancient photons, by light that once thought it might never be free. And maybe that's what makes the sun so haunting. Not its brightness, but its history. It is not a moment, it is a migration. Every flare, every rhythm, every pulse of warmth carries with it the story of time moving forward through resistance. We study the sun to understand our world, but in doing so we touch something older than our species, deeper than our questions. And it leaves me wondering, what other fires have we mistaken for light? What other truths lie just beyond the visible, waiting, patient, radiant, for us to finally learn how to look?